Hi everyone, this is GFan84, also known as TJ, and with me today is
AFK Bard. Hello.
how is everyone today? See if there's anybody there in the comments yet. But anyway, um, yeah, thank you for coming on, AKF. I appreciate it. I like talking about the ancient Greek, uh, you know, history and mythology, and it's nice to have somebody to talk to with on this subject.
Well, yeah. Thanks for having me on. I'm always happy to throw my 2 cents in, even if it's not worth very much in exchange.
It's all right. No, it's still going to be an interesting topic, and I'm sure there's going to be lots to say.
Yeah.
So, first things first. What period of Greece I'm referring to is would be, as many people call it, classical Greece, or Greece essentially from you know uh, 12th century to ninth century BC, and to the end of antiquity, which is around 600 AD. And so during this period, many may have classified it as the classical Greece. This is where you get all of the stories about um, mythology, Socrates, you have Aristotle, Plato, all these schools of thought, and all these things, you know, culminate into what many historians have considered the cradle of democracy, or the cradle of Western civilization for Greece. And we're going to briefly talk about ancient Greece itself, and then we'll go more into like you know the mythologies, and how they related to people back then, and even to how these stories relate to today's standards. So, the Greece that the classical Greece that we know it as, formed after um, the Mycenaean Greece, which is the uh, Mycenaeans civilization. First was in Greece. It collapsed. You had a dark age where the culture and um, everything was, the centralized government was gone, and so you had Greece split up into different tribal sense, and various you know different areas of Greece split off into little factions and that sort of thing. So what ended up happening was, though, during this time, you started to have you know what we now know as the city states, the polis, start to form together. These polises, Athens, Sparta, those are two great ones, but they're Thebes, different city states started to form and become very powerful in their own right. The reason why that they had more city states than they did like a centralized government per se is it had to do a lot with geography. So much of Greece, depending what part of Greece you're in, it's almost isolated from each other, geographically speaking. You had Sparta, which was in between, these two, mountain ranges, to where you get into this fertile farmland in the valley, and again, more or less separated by from its neighbors because of geography. Then you had, Athens. Now Athens, very much a port city, um, very much a merchant kind of type of city, and Athens was a huge, became a huge powerhouse, as did like other Greek city states and communities. Now these two may have been like the biggest and the most prominent in history, but interestingly enough, they probably would be nothing if it wasn't for the smaller farming areas and fishing villages that made up more of the territories. So to give it a bit more, I guess perspective on ancient Greece is um, when you had like the way the city states were organized is you had different mentalities. So a lot of them didn't really get along that well, but they tolerated each other enough to do trade and that sort of thing. Classical Greece really came to prominence right about um, hey, hey, Soul Assassin, yeah, Sparta, yeah, this is Sparta. Yep, exactly.
I never watched that movie.
Oh, you never watched 300?
I know, I fail at life, right?
Oh, it's all right. No, no, it's fine. We'll get into that actually here in a bit, but right now we're actually getting in more into the first, I guess, as many people have said, the first um, Greco-Persian War. So what happened was is that during um, during the development prior to the Greco-Persian War, is Greece, particularly Athens and its neighboring allies, started becoming very rich merchant-wise. Being near, right next to the Mediterranean Sea. One of their biggest exports was olives and olive oil. That was a very, very huge commodity. The oil could be used for food, for heat, for burning lamps and such. So it became a very rich state very quickly. Yeah, the Persians, too, which many of their territories bordered um, many of the Greek colonies that were starting to pop up over toward, I'm trying to remember the area's name. One second. It was over toward, oh, yes, toward Asia Minor there. And Greeks eventually had um, started up colonies over in uh, Milan, Rhodes, Lesbos, Crete. And so these, a lot of areas, as they were expanding their influence throughout the Mediterranean, this then would pretty much be right on the border of Persia. Hold on. Okay, hello. Oh, hello, Mama. There, how are you?
Indeed.
Hello.
Hello, me.
Yep, how are you? um, but as I was saying, yeah, so these areas started to pop up, these colonies. And at first, Persia didn't mind, but Greece wanted to expand its influence. So what it started to do was actually incite riots in many of the Persian-controlled cities that were on their borders. The Persians didn't take too kindly by this, of course, and they then decided to, send their fleet. Darius was the king of Persia at the time, and he sent his fleet to pretty much conquer Greece. This is what led to the Battle of Marathon. And what happened was, as we know from history, Marathon is like a turning point in Western civilization, because this is where here's this giant empire of Persia, and here's just this pretty much starting out usurper of Greece, defending itself against this mighty army. Well, the Battle of Marathon, what had happened was, you know, they actually fought off the Persians. They actually kept them at bay and actually fought them off, to where the Persians, not expecting such fighters, hightailed it out of there and then left and retreated.
Question.
Yeah.
Does the marathon running and all that come from the idea that they put up a very long fight?
No, actually, the idea of the marathon run came from the fact that they had sent, and I'm trying to remember its name. I'm trying to look it up here, but they sent a young man to run to Sparta from Athens, from Marathon all the way to Sparta to get help. Unfortunately for him, Sparta refused, and they didn't send help. But he had made this journey, which should have took him a week, and it took him like 4 days to get there.
Wow.
It should have took him a week, and it took him like 4 days. And so that's where the idea of a marathon, yes, came from.
Oh, okay, cool.
I'm trying to find his name, but I'm not. I know it's somewhere, but forgive me, and I can't seem to find his name. So that's the first. That's how marathon. The idea of the marathon run first came about. But so that was the first Greco-Persian War. Excuse me. So from there, now 10 years later, as many people have called it, you have the second Greco-Persian War. This is the one where Darius' son, Xerxes, would come and invade Greece, this time even with a larger army. Now, this is where the story of the 300 Spartans at the Battle of Thermopylae came about. It was here that the 300 Spartans put up such a brave fight at the hot gates, the gates of hell, there, because for as many Persians that were on the land, they could only fit through this narrow gorge on the side of a mountain and right next to the sea at the time. So what happened was, for 3 days, the Spartans held them off, and for 3 days, the Persians retreated. It got to the point where Xerxes was about ready to give up until a traitor betrayed the Spartans and told them where there was a hidden path behind the mountains to essentially flank them from behind. Now, the Spartans didn't just have they had the 300 Spartans, but they also had other warriors from different cities. So what ends up happening is, hey Mongo, how's it going? Hope you're feeling better. I heard you weren't feeling too good. Hope you're feeling better. So what ends up happening is, the Spartans stayed. They all get slaughtered, but it proved throughout history about the idea of few against many, and about sacrifice, and about doing what's right for your people, your country. But fun fact, militarily speaking, it didn't really amount to much, because 3 days later, within a week, Xerxes was back. Xerxes forces were back on the move. The Persians were back on the move. So, irregardless, I mean, it really, militarily speaking, it didn't really help much. But here's what it did do: it did buy time for more Greeks to mobilize, and that's when we get this other part of the battle, and that is with Themistocles. Now, Themistocles was an Athenian general. He believed strongly in naval power, and this is where he had earlier, even though many Greeks thought he was insane, he wanted to build up more forces, naval forces. This is where you get the triremes. Now, triremes were the ships that were long. You had, a crew about 100 and of almost, I believe it was like 168 oarsmen. They would be rowing the boat in unison, and what they would do is they would actually ram into other ships and split them in half. That they were essentially a giant missile. The ship itself was a missile, and they actually had um, soldiers on top of the ship, then would board the other ship, and then they would go into hand-to-hand combat. So, and it was there where the decisive victory was for the Greeks. And it was the naval power that actually broke Xerxes' forces, because then they were cut off. The forces had to retreat, and then eventually the Greeks did reclaim what was theirs, but it did take a good 10 years to do this. These wars, a lot of these wars that I'm talking about, it may sound like it happened in quick succession. It kind of didn't. It actually was over the course of like years. All this stuff happened. So,
I
these wars went on for a long time.
I remember reading a book, or well, not even coming close to finishing it, honestly, in college, that I don't even remember the name, but it was like this huge, huge book, and it was like the history of kind of like all of the old Greek wars or something.
Mm-hmm.
You probably know what it is. It was like some big popular one that somebody wrote a long time ago.
Wow.
My dog likes it. I basically came out of that trying to read it, just realizing, gosh, there's a lot of crap that went down over there.
Oh yeah, if they weren't fighting each other, they were fighting somebody else. That's literally what ancient Greece pretty much was. There was some time periods where there was peace, but it was pretty short lived. For instance, like this thing I just said about the Greco-Persian Wars. Well, soon after that, you actually would later have the Peloponnesian War, and that was a war between Sparta and Athens, and allies for both city-states also. And that one lasted about 15 years. I mean, it's just a constant thing. So to get a little bit more into it, so what happens is then, all right, so Sparta and Athens are two completely different cultural ideas. And actually, I'm going to get more into this a bit in depth here now. So here's something that's interesting. So Athens is like the cultural center of the world at this point. Philosophy, art, history, music, all of that. They were essentially like, this, beacon of ancient civilization of like, ideas of democracy, freedom, and that sort of thing, for the ancient world. Then you had Sparta. Sparta a bit more was more militaristic. They actually didn't believe in democracy. They actually had their children, their male children, all of them were trained from about the age of 7, starting at 7, to be inducted into the military. They wouldn't actually be put on the front lines at that age, but they were actually started to train at that age. And their methods were actually pretty brutal as far as how, they would train these children. Censoring my dog. Yeah.
Yeah, he has a lot to say tonight.
That's okay. Well, you know how it is. You're a young Greek looking for kicks. War breaks out. Yeah. No, that's literally what happens. I mean, they literally couldn't go more than 10 years without having a war. That's ancient Greece. So, from a cut and dry perspective, that actually looks like they couldn't be compatible. Well, there's a bit more to say about both the Athenians and the Spartans. Here's something ironic, and it's something that's kind of funny. For as much as Sparta believes in, military and militaristic, ambitions, and very much a conservative, what we would contemporarily say, conservative mindset, because they were very happy just being in the valley they were, surrounded by the mountains, felt safe, didn't really want to expand too much. But one of the interesting things is the Spartans had the women in Sparta actually had more freedom in Sparta than they would have had than the women do in Athens. Let me explain. So in Athens, for as much as they talk about freedom, equality, that sort of thing, is very much still male driven. Many Athenians felt that again, women's place was in the household. They weren't supposed to be seen in public, um, other than like religious ceremonies. Sparta was actually kind of the opposite, because the men and well, not even men, a lot of the boys had to go off to war so much and had to be trained for so long. The women in Sparta actually were essentially the ones managing the community. They were allowed to marry who they wanted to. They were allowed to essentially partake in gymnastics. They were actually, it is stated that Spartan women were just as competitive and athletic as the men were. And this was actually encouraged by the city and by the city state itself, because the argument is, if the men die in battle and it's only the women that are defending the children, they argue, they better be tough and strong just as much as the men are. And there's been several writings too, back in the day, of the interest that Athenian men had in Spartan women. Spartan women at this time, because of going to the gym, because of being athletic, were actually considered to have, well, let's face it, very beautiful bodies. People also forget that Helen of Troy, from the Iliad, was originally Helen of Sparta, and from what historical evidence they can gather, the Battle of Troy could have been actually a real world event. So it's very possible that happens.
Yeah, I seem to remember, like, well, when I was reading it, it's the way it's put out is so believably like written. Like it could have just been like, this is exactly how it went down, man.
Yeah, like I said, it's kind of hard to place it, because this is the actual Trojan horse story, whether you believe the horse part or not. The Trojan War actually supposedly happened before classical Greece, during the Mycenaean period. So, because there was a dark age where the culture itself and the government collapsed, it's hard to find any evidence of what really happened beforehand. What they can gather is from archaeological finds, which even that isn't always accurate. They kind of can piece together that, yeah, it might have been an actual battle, and it might have been a battle over a woman. Yes, that actually is actually plausible, especially since she was to wed the king of the Spartans at the time, and stolen away by Paris of Troy. And yeah, you can see how that could irritate somebody, especially a royal family with an entire army at his disposal. So yeah, that could be really bad. Yeah, Spartan women had more rights than the average Greek woman. Yes, that is completely true. Again, because the men were always off to battle, the city state mandated that the women had to know what to do in case they were ever overtaken, that type of thing. And like I said, there was many writings. Again, in Athens, as we said, we always think of Athens as this like progressive city state because of its art, its culture, its philosophies, but at the same time it still had very archaic values. Well, at least if we look at it from today's standard. But for them, that was actually the norm. And women, again, they were supposed to be in the home, or out only for religious ceremonies. They were to be seen but not heard, that type of thing. Interestingly enough, if you actually did watch the movie 300, Soul Assassin, when Queen Gorgo says to the Persian emissary that he asked, what woman thinks she can speak among men, And she replies, because only Spartan women give birth to real men. That was an actual quote from a Spartan woman when an Athenian woman asked her, how is it that, you're able to have your voice with men, and not be ridiculed and that type of thing. And she said that exact thing, because only Spartan women give birth to real men. So there was a lot of times. Oh no, that was the other thing. Spartan women were pretty much the ones to invent the burn. I mean, there are many written text about how Spartan women would just be completely brutal in their burns and like how they talked about people. There was a time where this woman saw her son, and her son was complaining that his sword that he was given was too short. And she simply said, "Well, take a step forward, and then it will be long enough." So it's like, and then there was another time where she felt that this other woman felt her son was acting too cowardly, and so she actually spread her legs, squat down, and told him, "Well, if you feel that way, get back up in there, and then come back out when you're ready."
There you go.
I mean, yeah, they were very much into the burns of their time. So yeah, they were pretty snappy. But again, like I said, they were trained and also encouraged by the city to be just as competitive and just as athletic as the men. So it makes sense, and it makes sense why they, many Athenian men always would do double takes when they saw a Spartan woman, because usually they were actually their muscle town. They were thin, fit, and beautiful by their standards. So it's always kind of interesting, how we see it one way, and then when you dig deeper, how many layers societies have. So it almost kind of reflects on today's society. It's like you can see something, judge a book by its cover, but then when you really start to peel the pages and really read into it, you actually see a lot more craziness to it. So, it's kind of interesting. So then getting back to the Peloponnesian War, and now this is where essentially Sparta and Athens and their allies get a war with each other. And there's no true victor, because this war happens and it goes back and forth for almost 2 decades. What ends up happening is Athens has this plan. They have walled in this path to the sea, and this wall was impenetrable, and so on and so forth. And they surrounded the city with a wall. And essentially, the Spartans, they couldn't penetrate the wall, so they would go around burning the farmland and destroying, the crops around Athens. Well, Athens, being that had that wall all the way to the sea, had a port, and so they were able to, still receive shipments of grain and whatnot, and food. So they never felt like they were going hungry. Unfortunately for the Athenians, plague had tainted some of the food shipments. And so within a very, very short time, especially in a very crowded city, this plague spread throughout the city. And Pericles, who was the leader of the city, he himself succumbed to the plague. And it was probably just a miserable situation, to the point where the Athenians were essentially ready to give up. And they kind of did. So throughout these battles and throughout these years of war, finally, Sparta eventually took over Athens. But here's the problem. Sparta, being as isolationist as they are, and again, they did not, how do you say this? They had other city states fight for them, but they were never considered Spartans, so they never inducted as actual citizens. They only felt that Spartan citizens were the only ones that could hold the rank of, hold the title of an actual Spartan citizen. No one else could. And so their ranks were very much depleted by this point. And unfortunately, they eventually spread themselves too thin, and they could not keep their territories, and eventually they were overran, and then they had to retreat back to the fertile valleys that they came from. So unfortunately, that had happened. So what happens after the Peloponnesian War? Hello. Oh yeah. So what happened after the Peloponnesian War is this is where you start to see Macedon take precedence, and this is Macedonia. This is where Philip, the One Eye, would eventually conquer all Greece, but because they very much admired and very much felt like they admired the cultural significance of Greece and they modeled their society off Greece, they became part of the Macedonian Empire, which would eventually be turned over to Alexander the Great. Now, Alexander the Great, again, he's not necessarily Greek, but he, again, used the Greek culture, used the mythology. He had an oracle even proclaim him as the true son of Zeus, this sort of thing. And his military campaigns into Persia and into the Asia Minor in general proved how much he was worth. I mean, they had set up colonies as far east as Afghanistan. Couldn't really hold them, but and then the Alexandria, Egypt, where all the historical scrolls were, and then they eventually were destroyed, which is so unfortunate. But Alexander the Great. Would then he went into Babylon, conquering Persia. He would then go all the way far east as India. I mean, these are like this is what classical ancient history is all about, like these grand conquests, these grand expeditions, and the exchange of culture. Interestingly enough, for as much as you see all these wars and as much as you see all this death and destruction, one of the biggest things that this did was actually open up, and this is ironic, open up more trade and more exchanging of cultures. I know it's a weird way of doing it by destroying one another, but it was one of the ways that they would exchange goods, and they would bring exotic items back from the Middle East and into from India. It's kind of interesting. Sparta were masters at trolling and one-liners. Sacred scared Philip from invading them by saying if to his threat of invasion. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that's pretty much how they felt about Sparta. They pretty much were like, yeah, we'll leave you to your own. But unfortunately, Sparta did get overrun because they just had no allies. They just at that point they were pretty much nobody wanted to trade with them, so they kind of had to just eventually give in just because of quote unquote their version of economic sanctions back then. I guess you could say. I remember that Alexander movie. I think it had Andrew. Oh yeah, that Alexander. Yeah, with that movie wasn't too bad. I thought it would be a lot grander than what it was, but it was okay. I mean, it delved more into the personal life rather than the actual historical conquest that Alexander did. The other thing Alexander the Great was actually known for was actually incorporating other nations into his army. That's what made it more stronger. So instead of just having Greeks, which was the norm, he would incorporate other, nations that had been conquered or had joined them into his ranks and treated as equals in the military. So that's why he was able to gain such a large army so quickly. Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna destroy you. Oh, nice fabric. Yes, quite quite literally. That is probably how it actually went. And yeah, so things such as colored fabrics at this time, silk, that kind of thing. These would have been more precious than gold for people that could afford them. So, like I said, merchants were really the ones that started to gain the most power. I mean, you had the aristocrats who had built their wealth up from farming, but merchants were becoming the main money makers. And at the time, there was a lot of political intrigue about how aristocrats were competing with merchants as far as having money and having political influence. Yeah, it was okay. It wasn't too bad. The acting was pretty good in it, actually. Yeah, Jared Leto was in it. I think he played his lover. Yeah. Jared Leto was in that one. Yeah, that one. That's right. And yeah, Angelina Jolie. Yeah, yeah, that was it. Okay, so then after Alexander the Great, then the Romans came. Well, there's a few more things that happened, but the main significant point, then the Romans came, and the Greeks became part of the Roman Empire, and even the Roman Empire modeled a lot of their architecture and ideas off of ancient Greece. So, it's very much always goes back to ancient Greece in that classical period. So
Yeah.
now that you guys have a good idea of like how the culture was, I'm going to go into a bit more of the mythology. Excuse me. So Greek mythology. Now this is kind of how do I put this? So Greek mythology is a lot different than many other religions in the fact that, like, not because there were many gods, and not at all. Many cultures had polytheism. So what it was the way they treated the gods. So in their tales of the gods and of the war where the gods gained power from their you know father Kronos, who was a Titan, and the other Titans. After that happened, then the Olympian gods were in power. But what was crazy was, so the Olympian gods, let's just say this, they were all kind of a bunch of dicks, and they didn't like each other. They were jealous of each other. They were jealous of humans. They were jealous of each other. They always fought with each other. Sometimes they did get along, but it was very few and far between. They pretty much gave them regular human personalities. For instance, Zeus, well, he's the ultimate player. I mean, he supposedly had a child with a Greek woman in every city state and every small town. I mean, that's just how it was. And then you had Hera, his wife, who was always jealous of the fact that her husband kept screwing around with other women, but didn't really do anything about it, but then would then blame the other women for it. So it sounds like real life, actually. If Zeus kept it in his pants, many problems the Greeks went through would not have happened. Yes. So I was asking, you are absolutely correct on that one. Okay, so why is it that the stories always had? I'm going to explain this. So the reason why the stories always had Zeus with a woman, they would have a child, and it was always in a different city or a different city state. The reason why that is it was a way for many of these towns and cities to feel connected to the gods, saying that, my hometown was visited by Zeus because he had this child with this woman in this city. So that's how my town is connected to the gods. It was one of the ways they could do it. So with mythology, that was one of the ways they could do it. Many of the Spartans believed that they were descendants from Heracles or Hercules, which is the Roman name version of the name, which is more commonly used in the English language, but it was Heracles. And, Spartans felt that they were descended from him. Athens itself is named after Athena. Athena was the daughter of Zeus and was considered his favorite daughter. She was both goddess of wisdom and of defensive war. And then you have, the god of war Ares, which, nowadays everybody knows because of God of War and, Wonder Woman. But yeah, he was really much, a lot of the gods didn't like him because he was God of War. He was always mad. He was always, get in the fights. Well, of course, So, and then you had Hephaestus, the blacksmith of he essentially made all their different creations and stuff like that. He forged, everything for the gods. So yeah, these guys were all of them, and all of them had so many different ways of doing things. Poseidon of the sea. Yeah. For instance, let's talk about how the gods really did like real terrible things to people. So I don't know if you guys have heard it, but the story of Medusa. I'm sure you guys have heard the story of Medusa, or at least a version of it. Have you heard the version of Medusa? The story of Medusa?
Yeah.
No? Or yeah?
It had something to do with, oh God, which god boinked Medusa, basically? She was just like a lady that got seduced by somebody in a temple. And then she got punished for it, right? And then she got like cursed into being a gorgon or whatever.
Well, it's not as cut as dry as that. Mm-hmm. Essentially, what happened was Poseidon had wanted Medusa for a while. Poseidon, the goddess of the sea, and she was actually a temple priestess of Athena. Well, he goes into the temple and pretty much forces her to have sex with him. And she's pleading with Athena to help her. But instead, Athena is mad at her for doing such an act, so she punishes Medusa.
Oh, yeah, clearly.
Yeah. Again, it's very much like I've heard so many women get mad at other women for the stupidest reasons. And then I remember that story, and that's like thousands and thousands of years old. And it's like, geez, I guess things don't really change. But yeah, essentially that's what happens, and it's like I said, the gods are like dicks. They're given more of a human personality and the idea of jealousy and of revenge and that kind of thing. I mean that was very prevalent in that mythology, so very much so. Then we talk about like story, and then we get into the stories of the Greek heroes, Perseus, Heracles, Jason, and the Argonauts, and so on and so forth. So this is where now this is where a lot of people who love Star Wars, people who love science fiction movies, people who love movies in general, this is where the idea of the hero's journey comes in. So all heroes have to go through, and the Greeks did this very well in the different stories. So, there's an origin story. So during this origin story, this hero might not even know who they were. Doesn't like the Greek gods. Well, dog spelled backwards is God. So I'm just saying, and that's probably why it doesn't like them. But let's look at the concept of that hero's journey. So if you have the hero's journey, you have the beginning of the journey. You have the hero, going on. He wants to do all these different things. He wants to go off and do these great things. Well, something has to happen. So a crucible, some sort of trial by fire, some sort of crucible has to happen. So what I mean by that is something in this hero's life needs to happen, a tragedy, something that propels them to go and be the hero and to go and train and learn how to do things. For let's take I'm not the biggest Star Wars fan, but since a lot of people are Star Wars fans that I know, I'll go with Star Wars real quick just because it's easier to do it. So you have Luke Skywalker, farm boy, raised, in the desert, nothing there with his aunt and uncle. He wants to go on and do great things, but he's still tied to his family, still tied to where he's at. What happens? His aunt and uncle die. They died tragically. They were murdered. Now, this propels the hero to want to do something, to go on this grand adventure. But, as we all know, the grand adventure, can't happen unless the hero becomes trained. So this is where the hero gets training. Obi-Wan Kenobi trains Luke. He starts to show him the ropes. Okay, he wins early battles. He gets good. He starts to, the hero starts to believe in his own, confidence. Then he meets the arch-villain, Darth Vader. You go into that. Well, what happens when Vader and Luke Skywalker first meet? Vader kicks his butt. I mean, he chops off his hand. He defeats him. So now, the hero must rethink what they're doing. Okay, so they rethink. They go through more training. They go through an epiphany, something of a revelation on how to defeat, their enemy. For Luke Skywalker, it's also finding out that Darth Vader is his father and that he feels that he can still turn him back to being a good person, and then they can defeat the true evil, which is the Emperor. Okay? You mean they weren't an automatic success? I'm stunned and shocked even. No, yeah, we're not going into the sequels. Just no. I mean, if nothing is earned, nothing is gained. Isn't that the old saying? If nothing is earned, nothing is gained. There you go. That's exactly what it is. But no, essentially, okay, so now, Luke Skywalker goes back. He goes and confronts Vader, but he wants to turn him back to the light side. He wants his father back. He doesn't even know his father. He doesn't even really know the bad things that Vader has done to people. It doesn't matter to him. He knows that there's still inside somewhere is something good, is something worth fighting for. He then, fights Vader, loses his temper, but then, unlike Vader, who, succumbed to this darkness, Luke then rises above it. He says, "No, I refuse to kill him. I refuse to be your puppet, like Darth Vader became your puppet." The Emperor then starts, fighting Luke. Well, more by kicking his butt, electrifying him, what have you. Vader begins to melt away, and Anakin then is reborn. Essentially, he then uses the last bit of strength he has, takes the Emperor, throws him off the shaft. I don't even know how deep it was. Star Wars fans, help me out. How deep was that shaft? And he throws him, and he kills the Emperor. Then Luke. He has a touching moment with Luke one last time. And now the hero's journey has been completed. Luke is now a full-fledged Jedi. He has defeated evil. And now he, according to the EU, now goes on to train, other Jedi to follow in his footsteps and to be protectors of the galaxy. So that's essentially the hero's journey. Now, the Greeks also add the hero's fall, which I guess you could say would be the Last Jedi. But for all intents and purposes, I'm going to just go over some of the other stuff. So, for instance, I'll give you an example. Jason and the Argonauts. So, Jason, hero of Argos and the Argonauts, he goes and does these wonderful, amazing deeds. He commands all these great, soldiers. Heck, he even is in charge of Heracles or Hercules. He's the guy in charge of Hercules. I mean, the strongest man in Greek mythology. He's in charge of him. They do these great things. He meets Medea, and he gets married. Well, he doesn't really marry her, but he has 2 sons to her. Well, what ends up happening? He falls in love with his own legend. He actually starts to suffer from hubris, which is, excessive pride. He starts to think himself as this great person, and do all these deeds, damn the gods and all that. I'm the one who's done this. I did it. No one else can touch me. Well, what happens? It's the fall from grace. So he wants to marry the princess of a king because he wants more political status. Well, Medea, who he had 2 kids with, doesn't like this idea. So what she does is instead of killing Jason, she poisons the princess, poisons the king, and then murders her own children, which are also Jason's sons, murders them. She then gets away with it. She exiles herself and then goes to a neighboring kingdom where she is given amnesty. And Jason, eventually alone, old, nothing to live for, he's on the Argos, and then all of a sudden, a rotten beam falls on top of him and kills him. That's literally how that story ends. So what happens is the Greeks, and that's why they call it Greek tragedy, is the tragedy is the fact that, he had such potential, and then he essentially throws it all away. And so, that's the interesting thing about Greek mythology, is that they have these stories, they have these types of things going on. And like I said, how telling is stories like this. Look at certain celebrities. I'm not really going to name any, outright, but look at certain celebrities. They start out young, enthusiastic, and they start winning these awards. They start getting all this publicity. They start getting all this fame. Well, what happens? They start getting excessively prideful. They start to, turn their backs on people who have, supported them from the get-go. What, does that sound familiar? It does in today's society, very much so. But yeah. So that's just a few of the mythologies. Now you have others stories. Did you know that one of the very first tales of a werewolf came from ancient Greece? The word lichen came from a man named Lichen. So the story of Lichen, I'll just give you that. So the story of Lichen, he was an Arcadian. He was an Arcadian king, and he and his family pretty much worshipped the gods like always. Really were attuned to them, and they did all these great vows, and they conquered all these lands. But he started to devolve into almost religious fanaticism, in that he thought the gods wanted human sacrifices at one point. Well, human sacrifices were outlawed by the gods since time immemorial. Well, when Zeus heard of these rumors, He wanted to see for himself because he did not want to go by just rumors themselves. So he disguises himself as a poor and lonely shepherd, a traveler. And that's how he normally would show himself. And just this old, decrepit, traveler seeking, shelter. So he goes to Lycon's castle. And at first, he asked, for some hospitality, some food, and for some drink. Lycon and his family and the courts there, the aristocrats there, they all kind of look at Zeus, who is in disguise, with kind of contempt, and would question him about what he's doing there, and who is he. Now, Greek customs at that time, that was considered rude to ask this sort of thing before they even had a drink or something to eat to quench their thirst, or if they were hungry. So that was considered very rude. But Lycon, dismisses this and says, let's, feast. But before that, he noticed, because he's very in tune, he noticed that this might be a deathless god, one of their gods. So he proposes a test. He wants to see if this god truly is a god. So he cooks up 2 platters. First, he kills a young slave boy, cuts him up, and roasts him on the fire. But then he takes a cow, does the same thing, kills it, cuts it up, and then they mix the different meats together because he wants to see if the traveler would know the difference. And so he goes, they all present the meal. Now everyone greedily starts eating, especially Lycon. And Zeus, who's sitting there, is just especially, disgusted by it. He knows exactly what it is. He is disgusted. He turns his head at the plate. He knows exactly what happens. But, so this is where Zeus, in his full rage, reveals himself. And he starts to shine. He starts to show his true form. Now, when he shows his true form, everyone in that area instantly turns ablaze and then to dust. I mean, it's just boom, this awesome light of power. But Lycon escapes. He was watching this traveler. As I told you, he was very much a religious person. He knew if they could be tricked or not. So he was always keeping an eye on him. So Lycon then leaves. He tries to escape. And he then was going to door, going to warn people that, the gods are walking the earth, and to, make sure you stay safe and do what they tell you. But as he went to the house and as he was trying to tell them this, he started to change. His hands became more like claws. His hair started to grow out of every pore on his body. Every time he'd go to speak, it would come out as a growl or a howl. And his nose became elongated and eventually became a snout. His ears got pointier. His eyes then became, like gold, and they would gleam in the night. He had become a wolf. And essentially, because of his wickedness and his craving for flesh, the Zeus had turned him into a werewolf, essentially. Well, a lichen. Get it? Lichen, Lycon. Okay. So that's where lichen comes from. Lycanthropy comes from. So essentially, Zeus, turns him into a werewolf to live out his days as a werewolf for eternity. Well, in the actual original story, he just turns into a wolf. But this is where the idea of lycanthropy comes from, Lycon. So, so even back then they were inventing fables that still ring true today, like werewolves.
I love it, honestly. Like a lot of the stuff is just, like you were talking about earlier, and it kind of goes through the whole thing into modern day. It's just like the idea of the single hero's journey, and how like just a very basic idea of a story can basically transcend time and exist everywhere and be relatable in some way. So
Yes. Yeah.
it's cool because like different cultures and stuff, you have very similar like creatures and mythological entities that you can easily be like, well, wait a minute, that's this Japanese god, but hey,
Yeah.
they're almost exactly the same as the trickster god, and
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and they're very well connected, and that's the other fun thing is the fact that like all these different societies from different parts of the world have very similar ideas. It shows that human beings, regardless of race or nationality or even religion, are pretty much have the same ideas and same values, same ideas of justice, of punishment. It's all universal, and it's very interesting, how these stories have still stayed with us and how they can still be used in a modern sense. George Lucas, who created Star Wars, was very much into mythology. That was a prime reason for making Star Wars. And you can see it. You can see it in the original trilogy, how much the idea of the hero's journey is in there. If you take the prequel trilogy, that would actually be more in the sense of the Greek tragedy.
Mm-hmm. I know.
Actually, okay. So you've seen Star Wars, right?
What's Star Wars?
You've seen you've seen the prequel trilogy, right?
Yes.
Okay. So in the prequel trilogy, what happened? So Anakin sees this vision. He sees this vision of Padme dying in Revenge of the Sith. She's dying in childbirth, and he is doing his utmost to prevent that. He wants to learn the secrets to how to create life, all this stuff. Well, what happens? It's his actions that cause her to die in childbirth. Every action he takes, from learning about that prophecy, every action he takes is literally causing it to happen. That exact story is exactly the same as Oedipus Rex. Have you ever read that?
Oh, right. Yes. Where the whole Oedipus complex comes from.
Yes. So what happens with Oedipus? Okay, so Oedipus, there's this oracle when Oedipus is born. His parents are a king and queen, and they are told, hey, when he gets older, he's going to murder his father and marry his mother. Well, they don't want this to happen, so they go to have him killed as a baby. Well, the shepherd that they give him to takes pity on the baby, and he gives him to another shepherd. Well, this shepherd then gives it to a neighboring king and queen who have no children, and they adopt him. He grows older. Well, think about it. Okay, he grows older. He goes to leave off on his own. Well, on his travels, he ends up, killing this group of people because they insulted him. Well, then he keeps going on, and he goes and he finds this Sphinx-like character, and she asks him a question. And what happens is, if he can guess it right, he becomes the ruler of the land. Well, he gets it right. The question, he gets the question right. And then by rights, he marries the queen. And all of a sudden, then there's this plague that befalls their land. And he goes to the oracle and asks, why is this plague happening? And he said, well, the oracle says, if you can find the person who killed the original king of this place, you will be able to cure the plague. So he goes on and on and on, trying to look for this, who killed the king, and then he talks to the oracle, the same oracle that gave his original parents this message. And he said, well, you have completed the prophecy. And he goes, what? And he goes, well, the people you killed on that roadway, that was your father, and he was the king, and you married your mother.
Oh,
See what happened? So these parents were trying to prevent this prophecy from happening, but then they ended up actually causing this prophecy to happen. You know what I'm saying? So it's the idea. you can't escape your destiny, and the actions you take is what causes your destiny to happen. You know,
Correct.
if you look at it from a storytelling thing, it's almost like that. That what a twist moment kind of thing at the end of movies kind of thing.
No, it's completely agree. And, honestly, in just the storytelling, if you ignore the fact that the sequel trilogy exists, the prequel and original trilogy are really good examples of both ends of that spectrum. Whereas,
Yeah.
like, the hero's journey, where you have that one little guy who is you're cheering for, that basically goes from no one to be all, and then the
Yeah.
other is the tragedy where
Yeah.
you try to avoid it at all costs, and it happens.
Yes.
And I think that they're really good examples of that idea.
Yes.
And I honestly, it seems like it's a Greek idea, because like some of the oldest stuff that we have that's written or whatever is like Greek. But considering it's so universal,
Right.
it's highly likely that this is something that clearly is somewhere like written,
Mm-hmm.
or well, not written, but told elsewhere.
Sounds like a title for Jerry Springer. I killed my paw and married my maw.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Pretty
Just
much.
wait for the sequul. Gouge your eyes out
Yeah.
and run away.
But yeah, gouge your eyes out. Yeah.
Actually, I gotta get running. No, speaking
Oh,
of running
okay.
away, I'm not gonna gouge my eyes out. Don't worry.
Oh, okay. That's good. Yeah.
But I've really been having a great time listening and learning all this stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah. Especially,
since
I figured you'd kind of like this because I know you love like writing and reading and learning about different tales and that type of thing. So I figured you'd probably like something like this. Yeah.
no, this is totally cool. And please keep reaching me, and this is cool. So
Yeah.
yeah, but thanks again, and
You're
have a
welcome, and thank you for coming on.
totally.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
All right, so I'm just by myself here. So okay, we talked about like the Greek tragedy and the hero's journey, the Greek tragedy. Talked about all of those types of things. Now, one of the biggest things is what does this mean? So essentially, it was the idea about morals, about justice, about crime and punishment. It's everything rolled into one, and these are essentially morality tales about how you're supposed to be good. You shouldn't be excessive about stuff. You shouldn't be have excessive pride, but you shouldn't also let people walk all over you either. So it's the argument of like being in the middle and trying to find that middle ground, that happy ground. That's all. Yep, good night. Yep, good night. But yeah, like I can go on and on about all the different tales and stuff like that. I have like books. I have all kinds of books about Greek mythology and stuff like that. But um yeah. So what I'm probably going to do is I'm actually probably going to wrap this up. And what I'm probably going to do is this will probably be a part one. What I'll probably end up doing is see about doing a part two. I'm hoping to actually make a full video kind of thing with this. So like, about Greek mythology with, pictures and that kind of thing. And to really illustrate what I'm trying to talk about, like, when I talk about Greek mythology and that type of thing. But next time I'm going to go more over to like the creatures of Greek mythology and what they represented and how these different feats were accomplished and using not just brawn for the hero but also the brains too. That was a big idea for Greeks, is to be the smarter fighter, not just the most talented fighter. But anyway, I am going to head out, and I hope everyone has a nice night. And you guys all stay safe, and I will see you next time. I might be on maybe Wednesday night or Thursday night. I'm not sure, but I'll try to be on one of those nights. But I am going to be on Orange Hat Reviews channel on Friday for the Rambo series. But thanks again, guys. Hey, you all take care and have a good night. All right, bye. Picture are awesome except for Medusa. I don't want to turn it down. Good one, good one. All right, good night, Soul Assassin. Take care. All right, see you guys. I appreciate y'all watching.